She was silent, calm, ignored at every turn. But what the airline didn't know, the quiet black woman they tried to downgrade held the pen that could decide a $4.3 billion merger. One signature, one envelope, and an entire industry was about to learn what real power sounds like. Silence. Flight AC-147 from Chicago to Seattle had just announced boarding when Simone Avery stepped into the priority line at gate B12 at 5:42 a.m. The airport was still quiet, fluorescent lights casting a soft glow on the glossy stone floors like a layer of cold mist. She wore a navy fleece jacket, simple jeans, worn-out sneakers, and carried a canvas tote slung over one shoulder. No rolling suitcase, no flashy accessories. Just a 36-year-old black woman with calm eyes and an unshakable composure. Simone held out her boarding pass to the gate agent. His name tag read, Logan. He smiled, though only for half a second. When his eyes dropped to the ticket and then back to her face, something shifted. This line is for first-class passengers and executive platinum members, Logan said. His voice remained polite, but his gaze locked onto Simone's face, as if waiting for an explanation. I know, she replied calmly. Seat 2A. Logan paused, then scanned the pass. A beat confirmed it was valid, but instead of inviting her through, he glanced sideways at his colleague and whispered something. Simone caught part of it. Must have gotten the wrong gate. She began to walk forward, but hadn't taken more than 2 steps when the intercom crackled to life. Security to gate B12. Requesting assistance with a passenger. Simone froze. All eyes in the area seemed to turn toward her at once. A few people raised their brows. A blonde woman whispered something to her travel companion. Behind her, a middle-aged man in a suit let out an exaggerated sigh, as if this delay was her personal fault. Less than a minute later, 2 airport security officers arrived, tall men in dark navy uniforms. They didn't ask questions, didn't make introductions. They just walked straight toward Simone as if they had already confirmed she was the person who needed intervention. Ma'am, we need you to come with us for a moment. Simone remained still. Why? One of them answered, We're just following procedure, ma'am. She looked back at Logan. He avoided her eyes. That was all it took. 4 words. No warning. No explanation. No wrongdoing. Just come with us. And in that moment, Simone knew it wasn't about the ticket, not about the seat, not about the bag. It was about her skin, about her silence, about a kind of calm that made them believe she didn't belong in the first-class seat she had rightfully paid for. Simone gave a slight nod, said nothing more. She followed them, one hand gripping the strap of her tote. Behind her, passengers continued boarding. No one said a word, but everyone saw, and they believed it was normal. Simone said nothing as the 2 security officers approached her at the boarding gate. They didn't raise their voices or touch her, but their mere presence was enough to quiet the entire area. Every gaze turned toward her, a black woman with a low bun, wearing a navy hoodie and simple jeans. In her hand was a first-class boarding pass, her name printed clearly, Simone Avery. Ma'am, please step aside, one of the officers said. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried authority, like she had done something wrong. No one asked to see her ticket. No one checked her name. Her appearance alone was enough. Simone stepped to the side, her eyes sweeping past the passengers, now watching her like a morning spectacle. She wasn't angry. She didn't smile. She was silent. Across the way, a white man in a gray suit presented his phone and laughed with the gate agent. No extra checks. No questions. He walked straight into first class. After a few quiet exchanges between the 2 officers and the gate staff, one of them turned back to Simone and said, Apologies for the inconvenience. You may board now. That was it. No explanation. Simone walked to the gate just as quietly as she'd been pulled aside. But inside, every detail was being etched into memory. The averted eyes, the barely audible whispers. Probably used miles. Doesn't look like first class. A flight attendant glanced at her name tag, then turned away. Her faint smile meant for someone else. Simone took her seat in 2A, slipped her canvas tote beneath her feet, and pulled out an envelope stamped with a red seal, setting it gently on her lap. She didn't need music. She didn't need her phone. She needed the silence, to remember, to feel every microaggression that eroded her dignity in silence. The plane took off under a cloud of unease. When flight attendant Marissa rolled her service cart to the first-class cabin, she smiled easily at the other passengers, placing warm towels in their hands and softly asking for their drink preferences. But when she reached Simone's row, she almost passed right by. Simone lifted her hand calmly. "Excuse me, I haven't been served yet." The attendant paused, her expression unchanged. "I assumed you weren't part of the first-class service." "How fascinating," Simone replied evenly. "Seat 2A. The attendant hesitated, then turned back to the cart. She placed a towel on Simone's hand like it was an obligation. "Apologies." There was some confusion. Her words sounded more like a judgment than an error. Simone lifted the envelope, her fingers gently brushing over the seal. Inside was a transfer agreement, one that could alter the future of the very airline she was flying on. But no one knew, no one cared to know, because to them, she didn't look the part. Before Simone could even sigh, a man in a gray suit walked up from the lower cabin and stopped beside her seat. He smiled at the flight attendant. "She's in the wrong seat, isn't she?" "I don't think so, sir," the attendant replied, then glanced at Simone with him. "Probably a rewards ticket, or a promo upgrade." Simone said nothing. She kept her eyes on the window. What they said wasn't exactly cruel, but it left a sting, just sharp enough to remind her that no one believed she belonged in the seat she had paid for. But Simone knew these quiet judgments were exactly what revealed the truth. They were unmasking a system that thrived on silence, and she had no intention of speaking up. She was letting their actions speak for themselves. The envelope rested gently in Simone's palm, pressed beneath the canvas fabric of her simple tote bag under the seat. No one in the first-class cabin of Flight AC-147 knew that the document tucked at her feet had the power to alter the fate of a multi-billion-dollar airline empire. Simone glanced at the envelope. Sealed with red wax, the top left corner bore the insignia of Heaven Summit Financial, the firm managing some of the largest silent investment funds in the United States. She wasn't their employee. She was the final beneficiary of a trust that had remained sealed for nearly 15 years, one that only allowed her to act with full authority upon turning 35. Today, that authority was tucked inside the envelope being ignored, just like she had been ignored all morning. Outside the window, white clouds streaked past like trails of silver mist. Inside, the first-class crew continued serving herb-roasted chicken and imported wine to the rows in front of and behind her, while Simone's meal tray had yet to arrive. She didn't complain. Simone had lived her whole life in waiting. She knew all too well what it felt like to be placed last, judged silently, treated like a misfit. Not for anything she'd done, but for the color of her skin, her quiet demeanor, or the way she didn't match the image others expected to see. But she also knew true power doesn't need volume. It only needs timing. She slowly unzipped her tote, her fingers slipping inside until they touched the corner of the envelope. Inside were final terms of a merger between two of the largest airline companies in North America, valued at $4.3 billion. And with a single signature, hers, as the sole heir of the founder of Heaven Summit Financial Holdings, the deal would go through. Without it, the entire agreement would stall, maybe even collapse. No one on that flight knew that the black woman they had spent the morning trying to ignore was the very reason their company's stock might double in value next quarter. Flight attendant Cameron Doyle passed Simone's seat once more, this time to serve hot water to the passenger beside her. No eye contact, no acknowledgement, just the cold breeze of indifference. Simone slowly pulled her hand out of the bag. There was no need to open the envelope now. Not yet. She turned her gaze back to the window, her eyes tracing the slant of sunlight cutting through the clouds. Behind her silence was a quake waiting to be triggered, and those who mistook her for the problem had no idea that they were the real fault line in the system. The cabin door opened with a click, and the cool light of the jet bridge poured into the first-class cabin. Simone Avery rose only after every other passenger had already left. No one stopped her. No one looked at her. But at the end of the bridge, two airport security officers were waiting. One male, one female. Uniforms pressed. Earpieces in. Neither smiling nor speaking. "Excuse me, Miss Avery," the man said as she approached. Simone stopped. She nodded slightly. "We need you to come with us to a private screening room. Just a standard post-flight review. Thank you for your cooperation." She didn't ask questions. She didn't resist. She simply tightened her grip on the canvas strap of the bag, carrying the most important envelope of her life, and followed. The corridor they led her through was one few passengers ever saw. Gray walls, industrial carpet, fluorescent lights dimmed with time. Room 3B was a small office with frosted glass and a metal desk at its center. Waiting inside was a woman in a fitted black suit, nameplate clipped to her lapel. Janine Holloway, Director of Passenger Security. Simone entered. The door closed behind her. "Ms. Avery." Janine began, her tone polite, but edged with something sharper underneath. "We received a report of uncooperative behavior on your recent flight. Apparently, you refused to change seats when requested and used language that was considered combative with the lead flight attendant." Simone set her bag gently onto the chair, her face composed. "I sat in the seat listed on my ticket, and I didn't say a single word the entire flight." Janine's expression didn't shift. "We also need to verify your use of a high-tier booking code that appears to have expired. Our system flags this as an internal use designation, uncommon for standard travelers." Simone smiled for the first time that morning, not the kind of smile you give out of politeness, but the smile of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. With calm precision, she unzipped a thin black leather wallet and pulled out a silver metal card, round, engraved with the intricate logo of Heaven Summit Financial Holdings. Beneath the emblem was a short serial number, HSFH 0932SA. She placed the card on the table beside the envelope, like a silent note hitting just before crescendo. "I am the decision-holding shareholder for the merger transaction between Heaven Holdings and Orion Air," Simone said, her tone even, neither fast nor slow. "This document is also the compliance sign-off code confirming final executive approval. I don't need priority," she added, steady and unwavering. "I am the priority." Janine paled the instant she saw the card and truly heard the words final executive approval. She turned quickly to the agent beside her. "Verify with Heaven headquarters." Immediately, the officer stepped out of the room, phone already dialing, urgency trailing behind him. And then, something unexpected broke the tension. Outside the frosted glass, an elderly janitor pushing a mop bucket paused at the doorway. His eyes caught Simone's, and he gave a slow, subtle nod. It was Clarence Dawson, once the executive secretary to the former CEO of Heaven Holdings. He had quietly retired years ago due to health reasons. No one at the airport knew who he was anymore. Simone nodded back. Just once. Quietly, Janine looked up, sensing something she couldn't name, a shift in the air, a presence she hadn't accounted for. Minutes later, the officer returned. His face had drained of color. "Ms. Holloway," he said quickly, "we need to release her immediately." Heaven headquarters confirmed everything. She's the final signatory on the Orion Air merger. They just issued a directive. No department is to interfere with Ms. Avery's itinerary again unless instructed directly by the board of shareholders. Silence dropped like ice across the room. "I sincerely apologize, Ms. Avery," Janine began, her voice suddenly deferential. "I had no idea." "Exactly," Simone cut in, her voice soft but chilling. "And that's exactly why I was chosen to be the observer." She rose, collected the envelope in her bag, with no urgency in her movement. "You know what's worse than discrimination?" she asked quietly, meeting Janine's eyes. "Doing it to the one person who can sign off on your personnel review." She tucked the envelope and card back into her bag, walked calmly to the door, and stepped out. The two security officers stood ramrod straight, like they were trying to learn how to apologize without using words. As she walked to the terminal, her pace unhurried, Simone passed the entrance to Priority Lounge. Her phone chimed once. The screen lit up with a notification. Voting rights activated. Heaven Holdings HQ merger execution initiated. Simone simply smiled. It took less than 3 minutes after she laid the envelope on the table and verified her identity for Orion Air's internal systems to trigger a Level 3 alert. No sirens, no flashing lights, but panic spread like a quiet fire on the surface. A chain of emails marked urgent, tagged with top-level clearance, raced through departments like lightning. On the 6th floor of the airline's headquarters, inside the Office of HR and Compliance, a massive monitor displayed in bold. Simone Avery, Stakeholder ID, HSFH 0932SA. A red alert banner pulsed across the screen. Ultimate shareholder protection. Immediate behavioral review required. Lorna Whitfield, the head of HR, was mid-meeting when her phone buzzed 3 times. She glanced at the screen, her face drained of color. Stop everything. Anyone involved in flight AC-147 from Chicago to Seattle this morning, get them in here. Emergency session. No explanation was needed. Back at Gate B-12, flight attendant Marissa was prepping for the next departure when a staffer approached, eyes tense. You're needed upstairs. Now. The look said everything. In the command room, Marissa found Logan, the gate agent, already seated, visibly nervous. Beside him sat an IT tech, a laptop open with security footage queued and ready, internal audio feed synced. We are conducting a direct compliance review, Lorna announced as she entered, on behalf of a strategic shareholder of Orion Air. She clicked play. The screen showed Marissa walking past seat 2A, Simone's seat, without offering water or a hot towel. Next came a clipped audio feed from the crew headset. Probably just use reward points. Doesn't exactly look first class. Logan shifted uncomfortably as the screen showed him handing Simone's boarding pass back, without scanning the barcode. Would either of you like to explain? Lorna asked flatly. Silence. Lorna exhaled sharply. Cold and clear. Marissa Cole, indefinitely grounded pending investigation. Logan Pierce, reassigned to short-haul domestic flights. Effective immediately. Outside the room, internal alerts were already updating. Every employee connected to flight AC-147 was flagged for behavioral audit. Some were barred from VIP service roles. Others had their special access privileges temporarily revoked. All were marked requires retraining. On the top floor, inside a private conference room, Orion Air's executive board watched the updates unfold on a split monitor. CEO Garrett Langston sat with his fingers interlaced, expression unreadable. She's not just a customer, he said, voice low but unshakable. She holds the future of this company's finances in her hands. And we treated her like a security risk. No one dared say another word. Outside the glass walls, planes continued taking off in seamless succession. But inside Orion Air, the system had just been shaken to its core, not by scandalous headlines, but by the silence of the woman they had deliberately dismissed. On the 15th floor of Orion Air's Dallas headquarters, CEO Garrett Langston sat in an emergency boardroom meeting with senior leadership. Each executive held a printed report of the incident. Employee names, timestamp footage, documented tone and demeanor. At the end of the file was a copy of the signed $4.3 billion merger approval, bearing the signature of Simone Avery, the anonymous high-level shareholder behind Heaven Holdings, a woman they had all once assumed was just a regular passenger. We didn't just disrespect her, Garrett said, his voice low but firm. We smeared the person who holds the power to redefine nearly half our brand's value. No one responded. Only the scratching of pens against paper could be heard as they hurriedly scribbled. Compliance audit. Begins today. Media attention surged when an internal whistleblower leaked footage in the cabin security feed. Images of Simone being quietly mistreated, followed by a frame of her seated alone with a red envelope in her lap, eyes fixed on a window. The photo spread across news outlets under bold headlines. The woman they tried to ignore until the entire system was forced to listen. At an aviation industry conference in Atlanta, one keynote speaker opened with a now iconic line. Are you sure you know what first class looks like? Think again. Heads bowed across the room. Simone wasn't there. She didn't need to be, because now Every time someone looked at seat 2A, they remembered her, not because she pushed back, but because she didn't have to in order to change an entire system. 1 week later, in a new hire training room, Simone's story was officially integrated into the mandatory module on unconscious bias and latent power. Leading the session was a deputy director of customer relations, standing beside a single, opening slide. Not everyone demands respect with their voice, but everyone deserves it through your actions. She clicked play. On screen, Marissa walking past the first-class cabin, a tray of drinks untouched, skipping seat 2A. From now on, the name Simone Avery was no longer just a quiet woman seated in first class. It was a reminder that the way you treat someone you think doesn't matter might just decide your future. 47 stories above the city of Chicago, in the glass-paneled boardroom of Air Financial Group headquarters, the sky had turned a golden hue. 5 members of Air's board of directors sat around a 12-foot walnut table. In front of them was a folder stamped, "Confidential Merger Compliance Final Stage." Simone entered the room. Her tailored gray suit did nothing to soften the quiet steel in her gaze. It was that very silence that now commanded the full attention of the room. No handshakes, no forced smiles. She pulled out a chair, set her canvas tote by her feet, and opened her slim laptop like a declaration of authority. "Thank you for coming," said Leonard Gaines, chairman of the board. His voice aimed for composure, but tension lingered beneath. "We sincerely apologize for what you experienced on your flight." "No apology needed," Simone replied calmly. "I'm not here for sentiment. I'm here to assess accountability." Her words landed with a pause that stretched across the room. She opened the document in front of her, pen poised above the final page, where her signature would finalize the $4.3 billion merger between Orion Air and Heaven Holdings. But she didn't sign. "I have 3 conditions," she said. 1, a full restructuring of the employee behavior assessment framework, including an anonymous passenger feedback system, transparent internal oversight, and behavior reporting based on results, not personal impressions. 2, mandatory training on unconscious bias and soft power, not just for ground staff and cabin crew, but for executive leadership as well. 3, the formation of an independent internal review board, overseen by a third party, with seats reserved for individuals who have experienced discrimination within the industry. Simone would not hold a permanent seat, but she would retain veto power during the board's initial implementation phase. Leonard looked around at the other board members. No one objected. "We accept," he said. Simone nodded once and signed the document. The signature did more than finalize a deal. It triggered a series of systemic reforms unprecedented in the airline's history. As she rose from her seat, Simone turned toward the window, watching the city lights flicker on. "Don't call it a reversal," she said. "Call it the first time you actually listened." And then she walked out, not leaving behind anger, but a system forced to relearn fairness from the smallest things. As Simone stepped out of Orion Air Tower, she didn't look back. The Chicago sky had dimmed to a quiet gray-orange, giving way to the first flickers of streetlights. In her hand, the canvas bag remained untouched. No one searched it this time. No one questioned it. No eyes trailed her steps with suspicion anymore. She didn't win. She didn't need to, because this was never a battle. The headlines called it a showdown. The morning paper screamed, "The quiet woman who brought a system to its knees." But if you asked Simone, she'd just smile. Not out of joy, but because people still didn't understand. Her silence had never been submission. It was a choice. On that flight, she didn't react. No shouting, no demanding rights, no outburst of rage. She simply allowed the system to reveal its true self, until the looks, the whispers, the repeated acts accumulated to a point no one could dismiss as a misunderstanding. Because some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to be witnessed. And the system had exposed itself, through its own entitlement, through a prejudice it believed invisible. 3 days later, Orion Air announced a sweeping corporate culture retraining initiative. On the same day, the staff who had discriminated against Simone were reassigned. Some quietly exited the company. But Simone wasn't at the press conference. She didn't issue a statement. She granted no interviews. She didn't need to. At a small cafe in the West Loop, Simone sat by the window, typing a few lines into her laptop. Beside her, a young brown-skinned college student nervously shared her first essay on social justice. The girl had no idea who she was talking to. Simone just listened, smiled, and offered a few thoughts. Not everyone needs to know who she is. It's enough that one person knows they've been heard. And maybe that's how real change begins. Not with applause, not with spotlights shining on the celebrated, but with the moment someone once overlooked chooses to stand still and lets the world hear its own footsteps. Simone stood up, left a folded bill on the table, and stepped out the door. Behind her, an empty chair, a peaceful glance, and a lesson that lingered in the quiet air. Real power doesn't come from making others bow. It comes from making them look truth in the eye and know they can't turn away.